Hi. Welcome to another video presentation from Review Central. In this video we will present how to properly prepare for, and successfully pass, the University of the Philippines College Admission Test, or more popularly known as the UPCAT.
What is the UPCAT? The UPCAT stands for University of the Philippines College Admission Test. As you probably already know, the University of the Philippines, or UP for short, is the premier tertiary education institution in the Philippines, and UPCAT is the primary way for incoming college students to get admitted into UP. In other words, to be a college student of UP, one must first pass the UPCAT. Admission to UP is the dream of many parents for their children. Aside from being assured of high-quality college education, studying in UP is for free.
Every year, nearly 100,000 of the best students all over the country vie for the limited slots for admission to UP. This is why not only is the UPCAT the most prestigious and most sought-after college admission test for incoming college students, it is also the most feared. In 2019, when the UPCAT was last administered before the pandemic, a whopping 140,593 applied to take the UPCAT, though only 101,134 were eligible. Out of the eligible applicants, 90,408 took the exams. Only 13% or 11,821 were qualified for admission. On average, the UPCAT passing rate is really less than 15%.
Is the UPCAT difficult? In terms of the test itself, we dare say that the UPCAT is no more difficult than its counterpart admission tests from the other leading universities in the country, such as ADMU's ACET, TLSU's DCAT, and the USTET of UST, among others. What makes UPCAT seem more difficult than it actually is the sheer number of examinees all competing for the very limited open slots for admission. In other words, in order to pass the UPCAT, examinees need not only correctly answer most of the questions or problems in the test, they must outdo most of the thousands of other examinees as well. Therefore, instead of asking if the UPCAT is difficult, the better question to ask is it difficult to pass the UPCAT? In the 2019 UPCAT we mentioned earlier, where 90,000 plus took the exam, less than 12,000 were offered admission. That's a paltry 13% of all UPCAT takers that year. Put simply, an examinee must do better than 87% of the total number of examinees, or nearly 79,000. That's what makes it difficult. But wait, there are actually a few more caveats to that. First is the fact that UP, being a public university, institutes some form of socialized admission. To put it simply, it aims to assure that students from poor families as well as the indigenous sectors but with good potential are given preferential opportunities to enter the university. This works to your advantage if you belong to either group, otherwise it means even less available slots to fight over with the rest of the other candidates for admission. The second caveat is that not all but many of the courses offered by UP are what are known as quota courses. Simply put, a quota course has a fixed number of slots, that is, a quota, that is available for admission. Certain courses, for instance, accept no more than 100 new students per year. Some courses have a quota of as little as 10.
Now let's proceed to ask the question every aspiring UP freshman student should ask before taking the UPCAT. How should I prepare for the UPCAT?
Knowing and understanding what to expect is the key to passing the UPCAT, or any other test for that matter. So what should you expect with the UPCAT?
First of all, let us state the fact that aside from the UPCAT test makers and administrators, nobody can really predict exactly what to expect from the next UPCAT. But we know and we've learned enough from previous UPCATs to make intelligent assumptions on what to possibly expect in the next one. We've analyzed lots of available materials from previous UPCATs. We've also interviewed people who have previously taken the UPCAT, mostly those who passed and also some who, unluckily, did not, to ask them what they recall and whatever insights they could give. We've also picked the brains of experienced UPCAT review professionals, those who make a living by helping would-be UPCAT examinees pass the exam. What is clear is that although the UPCAT cannot be exactly predicted, and the fact that from time to time UPCAT test makers thrown in some curveballs, a big portion of it, approximately 80 to 90%, can very well be predicted with a good level of confidence.
So here is a rundown of what we know and can expect from the next UPCAT. First is on the test question format. In general, UPCAT questions use the multiple choice format. A question or problem is presented and a set of answer choices are given. In general, there are 4 choices for each question or problem. This may vary from time to time, and we have heard of previous UPCAT questions with 5 answer choices. But from what we know from the most recent UPCATs, the preferred question format is multiple choice with 4 answer choices. Will there be essay questions? Based on the more recent UPCATs, there should be none. But again, this can be one of those occasional curveballs that can be thrown in by the UPCAT examiners. In fact, there was that one time when the UPCAT included some bizarre-sounding essay questions, the intent of which was presumably to bring about and assess the outside-the-box thought process of the examinees. Whether or not the next UPCAT will include essay questions or feature other curveballs, we can confidently assume that it will consist mostly of multiple-choice questions with 4, or possibly but less likely 5, answer choices.
What comprises the UPCAT? Based on several previous and recent UPCATs, the test consists of the following general subject areas or subtests: language proficiency, science, mathematics, reading comprehension. That's it. Basically what you learned from high school, right?
Now let's break that down. Let's start with language proficiency. The UPCAT's language proficiency subtest generally include language grammar rules or syntax, test of vocabulary, and verbal acuity in general. Questions for grammar rules and syntax can take the form of correct usage, identifying errors, correcting errors, spelling, punctuations, and so on. Also, a regular mainstay in the UPCAT is paragraph organization, wherein you are given a paragraph with its sentences scrambled, and then you are expected to sort out the correct order of sentences to make for a sensible paragraph. Likewise, appearing in the UPCAT but in much lesser frequency is sentence organization, wherein the words making up a sentence are scrambled and you are to figure out what the correct and most logical sentence is. Vocabulary questions may include word meaning, synonyms, antonyms, idioms and idiomatic expressions, and verbal reasoning. Verbal acuity, in general, can include identifying parts of speech, identifying figures of speech, and other nuances of spoken and written language. It may also include technical writing rules and applications such as in scientific research and papers, journalism, and business writing. Although in less frequent instances, we've also seen some language proficiency questions involving literary writing rules such as in poetry and formal speech appearing in the UPCAT language proficiency subtest.
But wait, proficiency in what language? The obvious answer is English, since English is the primary medium of instruction in most schools, and probably in all universities in the Philippines. However, English is mostly but just partially correct. This is a commonly mistaken assumption made by many prospective UPCAT takers. They assume, wrongly, that the language proficiency section of the UPCAT refers only to English. After all, most other college admission exams, at least in the Philippines, are entirely in English. This is a common and understandable mistake but can be a very costly one, if not corrected soon enough. The fact is, the language proficiency subtest of the UPCAT is for both English and Filipino. Filipino can be of particular concern, particularly to students who do not speak Filipino or Tagalog as their first language. Although Filipino is taught in all grade schools and secondary schools in the Philippines, it is not the first language of most Filipinos. In Luzon, there are several other non-Tagalog first languages, most notable of which is Ilocano in the northern provinces. In Visayas and Mindanao, Cebuano and Ilonggo are the more dominant first languages. Even native Tagalog speakers often have difficulty with the formal grammar and syntax constructions and rules of Filipino. And then there are the students from exclusive and private schools, mostly in and around Metro Manila, who can hardly speak Filipino at all. Our point is, the realization that UPCAT's language proficiency subtest includes not just English but also Filipino is very important because a prospective examinee must amply prepare for both language proficiency tests.
So how much of UPCAT's language proficiency subtest is English, and how much is Filipino? The English to Filipino ratio in the UPCAT language proficiency subtest has varied from UPCAT to UPCAT. In many cases there are more English than Filipino, sometimes 60-40, sometimes 70-30. It can even be as high as 80-20 in favor of English. Does this mean that more emphasis should be given to preparing for English language proficiency than for Filipino? Not at all. We've seen several past UPCATs, especially the more recent ones, where the ratio between English and Filipino in the language proficiency subtest is an even 50-50. Therefore, the more prudent way to go is to prepare for both English and Filipino in equal intensity. In fact, if Tagalog or Filipino is not your first language, or if you are one of those who've always had difficulty with Filipino grammar rules, whether you speak Tagalog or not, then you probably need to allocate more time for Filipino over English in your preparations for the UPCAT.
Okay, to sum it up for the UPCAT language proficiency subtest. If you have excellent command over both English and Filipino, then you won't have a problem with this subtest. The questions are fairly straightforward and are mostly composed of choosing the right choice to make a sentence, or paragraph, correct or reasonable. Expect that this subtest will contain the most number of questions, although not necessary given the most amount of time to complete. Because of this, your enemy is time. Learn how to read fast but also be mindful not to make careless mistakes. Aside from brushing up on your English and Filipino grammar rules and syntax, you need to review your figures of speech and beef up your English and Filipino vocabulary. Strengthen your command of idioms and idiomatic expressions, again both in English and Filipino. There may or may not be an essay portion for this subtest. However, it's best to be prepared and learn how to construct an essay with good structure and clear flow. If ever your UPCAT language proficiency subtest will include essay, it may come in the form of a curveball, some seemingly bizarre or even silly questions that are probably meant to test your out-of-the-box thinking.
The UPCAT Science Proficiency Subtest covers a lot of topics touching on practically all the different scientific disciplines or science subjects, so you will have a lot of ground to cover in preparing for this subtest. You will not only need to read a lot of diverse materials, you will need to review formulas and practice solving problems, too. From previous UPCATs we know that these following topics, and the subtopics as shown, regularly appear in the Science Proficiency Subtest. Biology, Chemistry, Physics, Astronomy, and Earth Science.
Based on past UPCATs, the Science Proficiency Subtest usually has an even distribution of questions for all subjects. However, some UPCAT takers claim that there is a heavier focus on Earth Science, so you may want to take note of that. Expect a few objective-type questions and more of application-based questions. This means that questions in those subjects are more likely to test your comprehension of ideas and concepts when applied in real-world situations than just questions that require memorization. Also, expect questions that will require you to do simple computations, especially in chemistry and physics, so make sure you've memorized the formulas. Unfortunately, there is no going around this. You may have a good grasp of scientific concepts, but unless you have memorized the formulas, you won't be able to solve science problems requiring computations. You can always make intelligent guesses, but the only sure way to secure a high score in the Science Proficiency Subtest is to memorize all the relevant science formulas. And by the way, you shouldn't be too surprised if you encounter a science proficiency question or two in Filipino. In fact, it has been a regular feature in more recent UPCATs. It shouldn't be a big cause for concern since usually these are direct Filipino translations of their English counterparts. They also usually appear on questions involving situational or real-life scientific applications rather than on questions with lots of technical jargons. Still, it will help you a lot if you have a robust Filipino vocabulary, particularly on stuff like the cardinal directions, units of measurement, names of geological features, and so on.
While memorization is important, you'll find that cramming textbook definitions in your brain won't help you much in the UPCAT, especially in the Science Proficiency Subtest. Making sure you have a strong grasp of scientific concepts also helps minimize the need to memorize. So don't just memorize. Internalize. The science subtest is pretty straightforward. Besides going over your high school notes, Make sure to answer a lot of practice exams, as the Science Proficiency Subtest usually follows the same format with just a few changes every year. You must exert effort to solve science computational problems, too. This will not only force you to review and memorize your science formulas, but will also strengthen your grasp of scientific concepts. And similar to practicing solving problems in mathematics, this will also develop muscle memory that can help you recall formulas and solutions to problems during the actual UPCAT.
Okay, so to summarize. The UPCAT Science Proficiency Subtest covers practically all the primary science subjects, namely biology, chemistry, physics, astronomy, and earth science. Although the subtest is fairly equally distributed across the subjects, we have reason to believe that it may be a little bit heavier on earth science. There will be lots of questions that are situational or involving real-life applications. There will surely be computational problems, especially in chemistry and physics, so memorizing your science formulas cannot be avoided. The amount of time that will be given for the Science Proficiency Subtest will greatly depend on the ratio of objective, situational, and computational questions and the total number of questions for the subtest. On average, each science proficiency question is allotted about 2 minutes.
Needless to say, the Math Proficiency Subtest is the most dreaded part of the UPCAT. This reputation may not be necessarily deserved, but the fact that UPCAT examinees prepare for it the most is undeniable. So how do you prepare for the UPCAT Math Proficiency Subtest? By knowing what to expect, how else? The Math Proficiency Subtest can be subdivided into the following subjects: arithmetic and number sense, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, and statistics. Each subject may come in the form of various topics as shown. The topics list surely looks daunting, but don't be too afraid. Knowing and understanding how these subjects and topics will likely appear in the UPCAT will greatly demystify the Math Proficiency Subtest. Take a look again at the subjects and topics as shown. Did you notice the difference in length of the boxes containing them? There's actually a very good reason behind that. The length of the boxes represent the estimated and relative percentage share of the different math subjects in the Math Proficiency Subtest. According to past UPCAT takers, the math subtest is mostly composed of algebra questions. This means that the number of questions for algebra is relatively and substantially more compared to the other subjects. So if you want to ace the Math Proficiency Subtest of the UPCAT, make sure to really review and practice solving problems in algebra. Nevertheless, you shouldn't overlook or give little time to study the other math subjects. Remember, the UPCAT will test everything you've learned in high school. Make sure to at least understand the basics of each topic listed above. Even if a subject only has one question in the UPCAT, that one point might be the deciding factor in you passing the UPCAT.
We find it a little funny that people still ask this question, even after seeing calculus in the list of subjects under Math Proficiency Subtest as shown earlier. But okay, since it is a favorite question, let us definitively answer it and put it to rest. The definitive answer to the question is, maybe or maybe not. That may sound silly, but that is the fact. We've seen calculus included in past UPCATs. And we also know of past UPCATs where there was no calculus. So should you or should you not review calculus in preparing for your upcoming UPCAT? Of course you should. If you prepared adequately for your UPCAT, which includes a review and practice of calculus, then it really won't matter much if calculus will appear in your UPCAT or not. If calculus does appear in the next UPCAT, we can be quite confidently certain of a few things. First, that it will just have a few questions, maybe even just one, compared to the other subjects. Second, it will require your knowledge and understanding of just the most basic concepts in calculus, mostly about limits. So don't worry too much about calculus, even if you barely manage to cover calculus in your high school math. Just review the most basic concepts and principles, and practice solving problems on those. There can be other occasional surprises in the UPCAT, particularly in the Math Proficiency Subtest. Of course, these are surprises only if you are not prepared for them. One of these is the possibility that just like in the Science Proficiency Subtest, there can be math proficiency questions in Filipino. You heard that right. Mathematics questions in Filipino. If ever you encounter a Filipino question in your UPCAT Math Proficiency exam, again, no need to panic. First of all, in most likelihood the question is simply a direct translation of an English one. And second, there will most likely be a Filipino translation of an algebra worded problem. What you may have to put extra effort to prepare for is to familiarize, or maybe even memorize, certain Filipino measurement units. If you are not familiar with the Filipino measurement units and the question or problem involves having to convert from one unit to another, then you can get into trouble. Don't worry, we will make a separate video tutorial about this, if we haven't done so yet. We will also make easy to download cheat sheets. Check out the description or visit our Facebook page for more information.
Here are some additional tips that may be helpful for you in your preparation for the UPCAT Math Proficiency Subtest. You don't have to study in depth every topic or subject. Just focus on the basics for every topic and master them. Make sure you are able to answer basic math problems for each of the topics. Practice basic arithmetic. Calculators are not allowed in the UPCAT, so expect to do everything manually. Practice solving problems on scratch paper, because that's what you'll be given for your computations during the exam. Sometimes, just memorizing a formula or a math law or theorem isn't enough. To fully grasp a concept, take the formulas, and understand how they were derived. For theorems or laws, know what they're used for and why. This can also help you when you're in a pinch and forget the formula during the exam. Practice, practice, and practice some more. This is the most effective studying method when it comes to math. Not only will you strengthen your grasp of basic math concepts and principles, it will also develop muscle memory, which will surely help you a lot during the actual exam. So pull out your old math exercise books in high school, and start solving as many problems as you can. Solve both easy and difficult problems. Both will contribute to your muscle memory, and both will burn the formulas you memorized into your subconscious. For people who aren't that proficient in math, this is probably your lifesaver and what can give you a level playing field with those who are lucky enough to find math easy. Yes, it's true that the Math Proficiency Subtest is the most dreaded part of the UPCAT. But no, it does not necessarily follow that it is the most difficult part of the UPCAT, or that it is the most difficult math test among various college admission tests. You need to adequately prepare for all math subjects, although in terms of the proportion of questions that are likely to appear in the UPCAT, algebra overwhelmingly ranks first. That means that you really need to master your algebra. Algebra is followed, although with a wide margin, by geometry, and then by the rest of the other math subjects in declining proportion. Yes, there may be calculus, or maybe there won't be. Prepare for it nevertheless, focusing only on the most basic concepts. Practice solving the most basic calculus problems as well. And yes, it's true, the UPCAT Math Proficiency Subtest may include some questions in Filipino. It shouldn't be too much of a concern, however, unless you do have difficulty with Filipino, in which case you need to work double time in reviewing for the Filipino part of the Language Proficiency Subtest. If they will appear, math questions in Filipino are most likely direct Filipino translations of algebra problems in English. What you should be more concerned about with math questions in Filipino are questions or problems involving unit conversions, as it necessitates that you know, and probably need to memorize, certain Filipino units of measurement. For the Math Proficiency Subtest, we cannot overly emphasize that you need to practice, practice, and practice some more. Memorize all commonly used formulas and practice solving problems with them.
There's one subtest in the UPCAT that is often neglected or taken for granted by many prospective UPCAT takers. That's the Reading Comprehension subtest. Some may reason out that they are confident enough of their reading comprehension skills, and feel that they don't need to spend time for it. They'd rather spend more time reviewing for the math and science proficiency subtests. Do you feel the same way?
Most of the feedback we got from the many previous UPCAT takers, both passers and not, was that the reading comprehension was too long, and that they couldn't finish answering it. Many of those who failed the UPCAT attribute their failure on the reading comprehension subtest more than the other subtests. And yes, as strange as it may seem, even more than the most dreaded math proficiency test. Very long, very exhausting, very tedious, and overwhelming are just some of the descriptions we got when we asked them to describe the subtest. The reason many UPCAT takers find the reading comprehension exam that way, is because of the way the subtest is structured. You will be given a selection to read and/or interpret. The selection can be as short as one paragraph, to as long as a whole page containing several paragraphs. After that, you will have to answer multiple questions based on what you've learned from the selection. This can be particularly daunting, especially when you need to flip pages or go back several paragraphs, to find specific details to answer a question. Even more so if you took the subtest for granted and did not practice doing reading comprehension exercises. Like with the language proficiency subtest, your main enemy here is time. And without practice you are most likely going to spend more time on this subtest than is necessary. The other reason, as will be explained in more details a little later in this video, is the fact that a point earned, or not earned, in reading comprehension, has the same weight as a point earned, or not earned, in math, or science, or language proficiency. And since you will need all the points you can earn to make it to the top 15% or less of the UPCAT takers to be granted admission, you definitely need to score as high as possible in this subtest as much as you need in the other subtests. Another way to really underscore this point is this: no matter how high you score in the other subtests, even if you practically score perfect in the math proficiency subtest, a low score in the reading comprehension subtest may well cost you your UP admission. These should be enough reasons for you to not take this subtest for granted, regardless if you are really confident of your reading comprehension skills or not.
The UPCAT Reading Comprehension subtest may use and feature materials from a wide range of sources, including books, magazines, newspapers, literature both contemporary and classic, scientific and business journals, charts, graphs, tables, infographics, and even comic strips.
The reading comprehension subtest actually demands a lot of very specific knowledge and skills. Here are some of the specific knowledge and skills you will need to fully equip yourself in preparation for this subtest. Getting the main idea or topic sentence. Appropriate title of selection. Picking out facts and details from selections. Summarizing and paraphrasing. Correctly identifying figures of speech like simile, metaphors, and so on. Taking the author's point of view. Literary and textual criticism. Understanding and interpreting symbolism in poetry. Deriving meaning through context clues. Drawing conclusions. Making inferences. Sorting out facts versus opinions. Interpreting charts, graphs, and tables. Understanding and interpreting infographics, and understanding and interpreting comic strips.
Again, very important but often wrongly assumed is the fact that the reading comprehension subtest has both English and Filipino parts. The English and Filipino parts are most likely to be in equal proportion. In other words, if there will be 100 questions under the reading comprehension subtest, 50 of which will most likely be in English and the other 50 in Filipino. The type of questions will likely be the same for English and Filipino. If you encounter identifying figures of speech in English reading comprehension, for instance, you can most certainly expect the same type of questions in Filipino too. Unless you are very comfortable speaking and reading in Filipino, you will most probably find reading comprehension in Filipino even more exhausting and tedious than in English. And that's why we need to emphasize that you cannot take this subtest for granted. You need to practice taking reading comprehension exercises as much as you do for math, science, and language proficiency.
Okay, to summarize what we learned about preparing for the reading comprehension subtest of the UPCAT. A lot of UPCAT takers are taking this subtest for granted. Many previous takers may have failed the UPCAT because of this subtest. Do not, we repeat, do not, take the reading comprehension subtest for granted. Oh, and don't forget that the reading comprehension subtest will have both English and Filipino parts, often in equal proportion.
Moving on, let us now try to determine which subtest to prioritize over another, or if we are even supposed to prioritize or not. Although each UPCAT question has equal weight regardless of the subject area or subtest, you may actually sort of assign weights or importance based on the number of questions for each subtest and the amount of time you are allowed to finish it. It is very important to take note, however, that assigning weight or importance is quite subjective and depends entirely on you as the examinee, how good or prepared you are in each of the subtests, if you are more proficient and therefore more comfortable in a particular subtest over the others, and so on. For instance, although there are usually more questions under language proficiency compared to mathematics, math questions are generally more challenging, relatively speaking, and the mathematics subtest will probably require more time and effort to answer. So let's say in the next UPCAT there will be 150 questions under the language proficiency subtest, and 60 questions under the mathematics subtest. With 1 minute on average given to each language proficiency question, and 3 minutes on average given to each math question, the total time allotted for language proficiency and mathematics are 150 minutes and 180 minutes, respectively. So we can say that the mathematics subtest is assigned more weight because it is given 30 more minutes over the language proficiency subtest, and each math question is given 3 times more time to answer over each language proficiency question. However, remember that each question has equal weight regardless of the subtest. So although it can take 3 times as much time and effort to answer a math question over a language proficiency question, they amount to the same score if answered correctly. In our given scenario, if you make a perfect score in mathematics but only make 50% in language proficiency, your combined score, assuming you did not skip answering any question, will be 60 plus 56.25 or 116.25. On the other hand, if you make a perfect score in language proficiency but only score 50% in mathematics, your combined score, again assuming that you did not skip answering any question, will be 150 plus 22.5 or 172.5. So should you put more effort in preparing for the language proficiency subtest over the mathematics subtest? It all depends on each individual examinee based on their proficiency, preparedness, and comfort level in taking each subtest. So you see, it's good to know and understand all these nitty-gritty details about the UPCAT to come up with the best strategy in taking the exam. As far as we are concerned, however, the best strategy is to properly and adequately prepare for all the subtests and concentrate on finishing all subtests with the highest possible score, without having to worry about which subtest to prioritize over another. Nevertheless, let's go ahead and try to deconstruct each of the subtests based on their number of questions and time allotment to understand them better. The number of questions for each subtest vary from UPCAT to UPCAT, but in more recent years that the test was given we've seen some regular patterns. Language proficiency usually has the most number of questions. It varies and ranges from 100 to as many as 150. Generally, the average time allowed to answer each question is 1 minute. Science usually has anywhere from 80 to 120 questions. The time to answer each question can vary widely, since science questions can either be simply knowledge-based or problem-solving, which involves a lot of mathematics. On average, we can probably say that the time given to answer each science question is 2 minutes. Mathematics can have as few as 60 questions to as many as 100. Each math question is allotted at least 2 minutes, and in rare occasions up to 5 minutes to answer. In most cases, and generally on average, each math question is to be answered in 3 minutes. For reading comprehension, a reading text or passage usually precedes 3 to 5 questions, all referring to said text or passage. On average, including the time needed to read and analyze the text passages, each question is given 3 minutes. The text passages can be as short as a single paragraph or can be several paragraphs long. Most reading passages are excerpts from books or old publications. Some are taken from classic poetry. Take note that reading comprehension questions are based solely on the given passages, whether or not the information contained therein are already outdated, or no longer correct based on present and actual facts. Especially for the UPCAT, reading comprehensions are not limited to text passages. You will probably encounter questions based on graphs, tables, infographics, or even comic strips, instead of just text passages.
It is also important to know and understand how your answers to the UPCAT questions are checked and scored. Based on what we've gathered from previous and recent UPCATs, here's how you can expect your answers to be checked and scored. Basically all questions, or your answers to them to be more precise, have equal weight. In other words, a correct answer in science is as good as a correct answer in math. A wrong answer in reading comprehension will cost you as much as a wrong answer in language proficiency. Should you answer a question when you are not sure of your answer? This is where it gets tricky. Based on what we know from previous UPCATs, and from our interviews with previous UPCAT takers, there is an element of right minus wrong in the way the UPCAT questions are checked and scored. A correctly answered question is scored 1 point. An incorrectly answered question will cost you a point and is penalized an additional 0.25 point, for a total of 1.25 points. A question left unanswered loses a point but with no additional penalty. So should you answer a question even if you are not sure of your answer, or should you leave it blank? We highly recommend that you should still answer every question. Hear us out. Remember that the UPCAT is a very competitive exam, so you will need to earn every available point you can get. If you don't answer a question, then you are already guaranteed to have lost a point. Now, let's say you are really clueless on a certain question, and you can only make a wild guess. With 4 answer choices, you are still guaranteed a 25% probability of getting it right. Which means, you can still earn the full 1 point for that question instead of losing it outright by leaving it blank. And what is the probability that you will guess wrong? It's 75%. Okay, so to put it in perspective, here are your options: a 25% chance earning 1 full point by guessing correctly, versus a 75% chance of losing 1.25 points by guessing incorrectly, versus a 100% chance of losing 1 full point by leaving the question unanswered. The 75% chance of losing an additional 0.25 point does sound scary, right? Still, in a very competitive exam like the UPCAT where you need to earn every available point, the 25% chance of getting a full point by guessing correctly certainly beats the 100% chance of losing it by leaving it unanswered. But wait. What we've discussed so far is actually your worst case scenario. It can get a lot better than that. We are guessing that in most cases you will not be totally clueless. If you can eliminate one of the 4 choices by establishing that it is a wrong answer for sure, then your probability of getting the correct answer, and earning a full point, increases to 33%, and the probability of getting penalized an additional 0.25 point decreases to 67%. If you can eliminate 2 of the 4 choices, then your probability of getting the correct answer and earning a full point, versus the probability of guessing wrong and getting penalized an additional 0.25 point, becomes an even 50-50. How do you increase the odds from 25% to 50% in your favor? By employing intelligent guessing techniques. You can learn some useful and intelligent guessing techniques by watching some of our featured videos on this channel.
So to sum it up, the UPCAT comprises 4 subtests: language proficiency, science proficiency, math proficiency, and reading and comprehension. The number of questions vary from subtest to subtest. Language proficiency can be anywhere from 80 to as many as 150 questions. Science proficiency can have from 80 to 120, usually 100. Math proficiency can have from 60 to 100 questions. Reading comprehension usually has 100. All subtests can have questions both in English and Filipino. This is practically a certainty for both language proficiency and reading and comprehension, where the proportion of English and Filipino questions can be up to 50-50. From time to time, UPCAT takers are surprised to see a few questions in Filipino in the science and math subtests. Yes, it can happen in any UPCAT. For the test format, it is generally a multiple choice type of test for all the subtests, with each question accompanied by 4, and in rare cases 5, answer choices. 1 question amounts to 1 point, regardless of the subtest. An additional 0.25 point penalty is given for each wrong answer. No additional penalty for no answer. There may or may not be essay questions. Usually there is none.
Okay, so you prepared, or are preparing adequately for the different subtests of the UPCAT. What else do you need to take into consideration to increase your chances of getting admitted into the UP system? Let us now discuss some factors outside of the UPCAT that can greatly impact your admission, or non-admission to UP. First is that you need to know and understand that the basis for admission into UP is the University Predicted Grade, or UPG, which generally consists of 40% of your high school grades and 60% of your UPCAT score. So it's not just your UPCAT score, although it is the bigger part, that will determine whether you will be admitted or not. Your high school grades matter. Let that sink in for a moment. So if you are now in high school, and is eyeing to take the UPCAT, you must not take your high school grades for granted. You can do something to increase your chances of getting into UP even before actually taking the UPCAT. And that is by striving to get as good grades as you can, while still in high school. Of course, since the bigger 60% of your UPG will come from your UPCAT score, combined with very tight competition and very limited slots, the more reason for you to really prepare well for the UPCAT to further improve your chances of getting admitted into UP.
You also need to be aware of and understand UP's socialized admission system. The official term for it is Policy of Democratization in the UP Admissions. We quote directly from the UP College Admissions website, quote, "To implement the policy of democratization to make the UP studentry more representative of the nation's population, socioeconomic and geographic considerations are factored in the selection of campus qualifiers." End of quote. Simply put, as a public university and as the premier tertiary school operated and maintained by the Philippine government, UP is committed to making sure that deserving students from poor families and the grassroots, including indigenous groups, can have equal access to UP. To this end, a certain percentage of admission slots are reserved for this sector. But what does this mean to you? If you belong to this sector, then this will work in your favor, and can greatly increase your chances of getting admitted into UP. It doesn't mean, however, that you need not take the UPCAT anymore, nor that you can afford to make a so-so score. Remember that there are about 100,000 UPCAT takers every year, each one vying for the same very limited slots. There can be even more applicants from poor or indigenous families, and you will be competing with them for the so-called socialized admission slots. If you do not belong to that sector, then this factor will obviously work against you, as it takes away even more admission slots that should have been available to you.
And then there are the quota courses in UP. What are these? How will they impact your chances of getting admitted, and why are they relevant in your preparation to take the UPCAT? Quota courses are courses offered by UP that have very limited slots for admission. The Bachelor of Science in Business Management course offered by the College of Business Administration is a good example of a quota course. For the school year 2022 to 2023, for instance, the BS in Business Management course accepted only about 100 applicants for admission. The admission application process in UP requires applicants to choose their first, second, and third course preferences. If you chose quota courses for all three of your preferences, for instance, then you effectively limited your chances of getting admitted to the total number of slots available for your three preferred courses. That is a very narrow window of opportunity for you to get admitted. This is not to discourage you from choosing quota courses for your preferred course to be admitted into. If you really want a particular course, then go for it. We are just saying that this factor matters a lot, so it may require some level of strategizing on your part during your application process. For instance, if you chose a quota course for your first preference, then you may want to make sure that your second preference is not a quota course. You also must make sure that you carefully choose your second and third course preferences. Some applicants take this matter for granted, and choose random courses for their second and third preferences just to comply with the application requirements. This can lead to very unpleasant problems for you if you do this. We know of a recent UP admission applicant who successfully passed the UPCAT and offered admission, but for her second rather than her first course preference. It turned out her first course preference is a quota course, and she probably did not make the quota. The problem was, she randomly selected her second and third preferences, and have no intention at all to enroll in any of those courses if offered admission. She ended up having to forego her UP admission and enrolled in a different university, which is a shame since she worked so hard to pass her UPCAT, successfully passed it, and actually already got offered admission. We also know of some UPCAT takers who were hell-bent to get admitted into UP, that they actually painstakingly chose courses that were neither quota courses nor popular. Why is that? According to them, Their most important consideration was to get admitted no matter what or how, so they purposefully sought and took the path of least resistance. They claimed that after completing 1 or 2 semesters they applied to transfer or shift courses, and it was not a difficult process. Whether or not their claim that transferring or shifting courses in UP is not difficult is beyond our competency to comment on, and also beyond the scope of this presentation. We are only sharing this to underscore the importance of taking into account UP's quota courses in your application for UP admission.
As of 2022, UP has 8 constituent universities with 17 campuses all over the country. In the UP admission application process, you will be required to choose your primary campus of choice, and at least a second choice. Just like in choosing your second and third course preferences, do not take your second, or even third campus choice for granted. Each of the campuses and the courses that they host have set capacities. If your primary choice of campus has reached its capacity, you may be offered admission in your next campus of choice. Knowing that your choice of campus will also play an important factor in your admission, you should also include it in your UP admission application strategy. What do we mean by this? Historically, the bulk of applications for UP admissions are concentrated on UP Diliman and UP Manila, which are both located in Metro Manila. Knowing this, make your campus preferences accordingly. If going to a campus other than UP Diliman or UP Manila is not a big issue for you, then choose an alternative campus that suits you. Fewer applicants may have chosen that campus, which increases your chances of getting admitted. Of course, you also need to take into consideration that each UP campus offers only a specific set of courses. UP Manila, for instance, is focused mostly on medical courses. In other words, both your choice of courses and campuses can either increase or decrease your chances of being offered admission.
At the beginning of this video presentation, we stated that the UPCAT is the primary way for incoming college students to get admitted into UP, and not to be a college student of UP, one must first pass the UPCAT. That begs the question, is there another way to get admitted into UP without taking the UPCAT? The quick answer to this is yes. In fact, there are a few other ways of getting into UP without taking the UPCAT, but it is not that simple. Let's discuss them anyway. First is when there is a catastrophic event, or if there is an ongoing threat to public safety that prevents the conduct of the UPCAT. A perfect example is the COVID-19 pandemic. Did you know that since the onslaught of the COVID-19 pandemic there was no UPCAT? Until the creation of this video presentation, the conduct of the next UPCAT remained uncertain. Let us quote directly the official UP statement about this from the UP admissions website. Quote, "Due to the dynamic developments in the public health situation in the light of COVID-19, there is no final decision yet as to whether an admission test will be administered for intake year 2022 to 2023. End of quote. So how did UP go about admitting freshmen for the affected academic years? According to the UP admissions website, quote, "In the absence of a college admission test, the composite of the final grades in grades 8, 9, 10 and 11 shall be the basis to determine the UPG. Specific degree programs may request for additional requirements to qualify for admission if deemed necessary." End of quote. Of course, this way of getting into UP without taking the UPCAT is more of an exception, since it depends solely on events and circumstances that are beyond anyone's control. But there are 2 other more definite ways to get admitted into UP without taking the UPCAT.
The first is via the ISCO Lar Nong Bayan program. In general, ISCO Lar Nong Bayan is a moniker or term used to refer to all students of UP. However, not known to many, there is a legislation known as the ISCO Lar Nong Bayan Law of 2014, the provisions of which applies to not only UP, but all state universities in the Philippines. Quote, "If you are a Filipino public high school graduate in the top 10 of your graduating class, you may apply for freshman automatic admission, as provided by the ISCO Lar Nong Bayan Law of 2014. The law also requires that you comply with other admission requirements of the university, and enroll in a UP campus that is in the same region as your high school." End of quote. We quoted that directly from the UP admissions website. If you think you qualify to the ISCO Lar Nong Bayan program, refer to the UP admissions website or contact the UP admissions office for further details.
The final way to get admitted into UP without taking the UPCAT, at least as far as we know, is through international qualifications. Quote, foreign or Filipino applicants who have graduated or are graduating from a secondary school abroad and have not enrolled in college before the next intake school year may be admitted as freshmen by automatic admission, provided they meet other admission requirements, including qualifications for college admission by national or international foreign administered examinations. End of quote. Again, we are quoting from the UP admissions website.
So there you go, folks. You have just watched Review Central's definitive and ultimate guide to preparing for the University of the Philippines College Admission Test. Good luck if you are taking the UPCAT soon.